And there's a great speaker bio of him in the newsletter. And I hope you read every word of it, but I want to give a lot of time to Richard. I think that what I'd like to highlight is that to me, Richard is an example of what you can do with hard work and dedication and courage, and how ordinary people can become heroes. And Richard is one of my heroes. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he's happily married and has 2 sons and 4 grandkids, and still manages to go to their track meets and their baseball games and things like that. So, Richard, I urge you to read the full biography in our newsletter, and Richard will send you a copy of it. You probably sent us a copy in the first place, but it's so nice to see you again. I must say that the great thing about Facebook is that several years ago, Richard and I were able to connect again, and I was greatly wasn't surprised to find out what great things that he's done. So take it away, Richard. I made you co-host, by the way, so that you can share anything if you want to on the screen. And I ask all our other people to mute themselves so we won't get any background noise. Thanks.
Thank you, Mac. What an honor it is to be invited to share with you all my story. I'll talk a little bit about that, but also talk probably more, I get in trouble for that, about the Oklahoma City National Memorial, which was something that was a part of my life for the last 26 years. Monday, we commemorated our 26th anniversary of the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, which killed 168 innocent men, women, and 19 children. Those were my coworkers and my friends that I had been with every day for 18 years prior to 1995. This was the worst act of domestic terrorism on American soil, and is continued to be that today, unfortunately. My responsibility, as you'll read in the bio, I'll try to keep this brief, was that I was responsible for all the federal buildings in the state of Oklahoma. We're like the GSA is like we're like the property managers for the government. We're responsible for maintenance, operation, construction of all the federal buildings. Mine just happened to be in Oklahoma, and our offices just happened to be in the Murrah building, where we had moved after the building had opened in April of 1977. The people in the building were hardworking, dedicated people, government workers, all doing their jobs. Visitors to the building, if everyone was at work that day, there would have been about 450 people working, but there were many, many agencies that worked in the field, so not everyone was there. And the 116 federal workers were killed. The remainder were visitors to the building, doing business with Social Security, HUD, Veterans Administration, some of the military branches. So it was a wide variety. I came to work that morning just like I did every morning. I came in early, about 5:30. I worked out. I came to work, going to office maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock, and started answering calls from the previous day, catching up on the day's business, checking out the HVAC systems, make sure everything was operating correctly, and had gone to a meeting in the office behind my office. My office was on the first floor on the west end of the building. And I'll show you some pictures here in a little bit and try to identify a location where our offices were in comparison to the truck bomb. Little did we know at the same time that we came in early that morning that a truck loaded with 4,800 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer and fuel oil was coming down Interstate 35 from Kansas toward our building. I came out of the meeting about 9 o'clock, was standing there talking with my planner estimator about the results of the meeting we had with the clerk of court from the district courts across the street. And it's the last thing I remember. I've been able to put the pieces together to be able to share and tell my story because, one, I wanted to know myself, but two, I think it was important for people to understand these thousands of stories that we have from April the 19th to be able to share with people. And Mac, I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint here if I can. Do I hit share screen?
Yep.
Okay.
You're on that.
Can you see it? Oh.
Can you share? Oh, over there, huh?
Where?
Right, see, on the same.
Oh, hang on.
His
Sorry,
IT person is his wife.
The secret helper.
we won't tell. Okay. Based on what I heard from one of our guests this morning, I wanted to share with you guys that there's only 2 reasons that I would ever move to Texas. And Mac can appreciate that as an Oklahoman. And these are the 2 reasons. These are Kenzie and Carson, our 2 grandkids that live down here. We now have 2 in Oklahoma. So we burn the road up between Oklahoma City and here regularly to see them. We just got back after commemorating the 2nd anniversary. 26th anniversary, excuse me. This is the Murrah building before. It was a typical federal building. It was glass, it was concrete and granite. This was 5th Street that ran in front of the building. And right about here was where the truck was parked that morning. This is the back of the building, the plaza that was behind the building. Underneath that was a 4-story parking garage because it helped parking for the entire federal campus, which was the Federal Bank Courthouse and bankruptcy courts. This was a picture that my office manager, Joanne, kills me every time she realizes that I've shown the picture. But this is looking at, this is my desk. This is the street that ran in front of the building, the sidewalk where people walked up to the building every morning. Across the street was a water resources building from where there was a recording made of the only recording made of the bomb itself. It gives you a perspective of where my office was that morning. This is my office afterwards. I found this picture about 10 years ago, had no idea what it had looked like and what it was really like that morning. As I stood in my office that morning talking to my planner estimator, as I said, the last thing I remember, I didn't hear anything, I didn't feel anything. I was carried out of the building and rescued by an Oklahoma City policeman by the name of Terry Yakey. And he told in his story that he came in through here somehow and found an arm sticking out of a rubble pile, and he felt and he couldn't get a pulse. So he went on to help what had turned out to be my coworker, Tom, that was in my office with me. He carried him out of the building. He came back in. He realized that I had moved. I had a pulse. I was alive, dug me out, carried me out of the building, and put Tom and I in the same ambulance together and got us to the hospital at 9:35. And the bomb went off at 9:02. This is a picture of that was taken. This was Tom, another one of those heroes.
We're losing your audio there.
Treasure to us because we know that without this is, sorry, another story about Officer Terry Yakey. And for us, it's very important and always has been, as we tell in our museum, the stories of these first responders. They are our heroes. And I truly believe that he's the reason that I'm here today. Unfortunately, we lost him to suicide a year later. The media tried to play it that it was because of the bombing, but it could have been. These heroes did not want recognition. They did not want to be didn't want to stand out. They didn't want to tell their stories, but it was important for us to be able to do that in the museum. This is just another picture of an example of those hundreds of thousands that responded immediately after the bombing to help. There was only one rescue worker that was killed. Her name was Rebecca Anderson. She was killed as she came around the building to come and help by a piece of debris that fell off the building and hit her in the head. She died a few days later. And my wife, Lynn, and I found out later that it turned out that she was someone we knew. Her name was Rebecca Harold at that time. I played softball with her husband, and Lynn had actually played the piano at her nurse's graduation. So the connection started to become amazing at that point in terms of reaching out. This is what most people saw on the videos, on the television for the days and weeks after that. This is where my office was, right here. Officer Yakey came in, parked over here somewhere, came in through the building, carried us out through that to the waiting ambulance at that point. This column that I'm pointing at right here was the last vertical column on the front facade of that building that stood. I firmly believe that that's probably one of the reasons that the building did not implode on itself. They got us to the hospital at 9:35. They sent us to University Hospital, Mac, which was a little bit further away because St. Anthony's was already full at that time. I was taken to labor and delivery. And the reason for that was that these hospitals had set up all of these emergency triage areas in response, hoping and assuming that there would be hundreds or if not thousands of survivors that they would have to take care of. I just so happened to be the one that they took to labor and delivery. And I got this really neat card from them a couple months later, hailing me as their first male patient. And in the letter, one of them told me that I need to learn to push, and that they were apologized for the Foley catheter. And it was interesting because these people were used to giving life as opposed to trying to save life. So it was very difficult for these first responders. This is a picture of the front of the Murrah building. And this is a very important picture because it was part of evidence in the trials of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols that I testified at in Denver. It showed that one, the building was visible from the street. You could see that there was a daycare in the building. The truck was parked directly underneath the daycare. There was a lot of discussion in the coming years about whether or not McVeigh and his co-conspirator Nichols knew that there was a daycare in the building. It was obvious that they could tell that. It was around Easter. There were things on the windows that you could see into the daycare. The cribs for the babies were up against the window. So we knew, and we now know, that they knew exactly what they were trying to do, and that was kill everybody in the building. And that's a difficult word, but we use it very strongly. One of the things that's very important for people to understand is that something we call the Oklahoma Standard, and that came about because of the response that people gave to Oklahoma City at that time, but also how the people of Oklahoma City responded. And Mac, you can understand and appreciate this because at that time, there are a lot of people that the term Okie had been used for many years since the Dust Bowl. And people did not realize or didn't think internationally, or as it were, that we could respond to something of this magnitude without realizing that we were used to responding to tornadoes and other tragic things that happened with people that were injured. In that response from the people all over the country, there were also people from New York that responded. The rescue and recovery teams became recovery almost immediately. There were also some that were killed on 9/11 of those that had responded to Oklahoma City. One of the things that we've been able to do is to reach out after 9/11 to survivors and family members in New York and make a connection with them. Then over the years, Lynn and I became involved with a group called the World Trade Center Survivors Network that we correspond with and have been to many of the anniversaries in New York City. They come to Oklahoma City on a regular basis to our anniversary ceremony. So we've made a unique connection because of this tragedy. It's very important for us. The trials were something that was very difficult for me. I was asked to testify in both the federal trials and one state trial, but I felt like it was important to represent my community, my friends and coworkers, and my state in terms of justice. Timothy McVeigh was tried, found guilty, given the death sentence, and was executed in July of 2001. Justice was served. Terry Nichols was his co-conspirator. He is in a prison in Colorado, will be there for the rest of his life. He sees the light of day, maybe 1 hour a day. So again, as a co-conspirator, he did not receive the death penalty. So he will be there. one of the things that's difficult to think about is Timothy McVeigh was a decorated Iraqi war veteran. He was from Buffalo, New York. He went to the war, joined the Army, went to the war, came back as a decorated veteran, decided he wanted to join the Special Forces, could not qualify physically because of what he had gone through in Iraq, got out of the service, met Nichols, a couple other people, and started this anti-government thinking process that most of us don't understand to this day, and subsequently decided, for some unknown reasons, obviously, that he wanted to kill as many innocent men, women, and children as he possibly could. And I tell people all the time that one of the things that one of his biggest mistakes is he didn't kill all of us. And by not doing that, it made us stronger as a community. It gave us a purpose. We wanted to make sure that we never forgot the 168 that we lost, and we made sure and have made sure over the years that they are never forgotten. One of the things that we did in the early days was the mayor of Oklahoma City initiated a 350-member task force to decide and determine if there was a need for a memorial to be built. That task force was initiated and headed by a lawyer by the name of Bob Johnson, who was our guiding force all those years to help us through this process. Once we decided we wanted to build a memorial, we fundraised in 5 years, raised $29.5 million of private money, designed, built, and dedicated in 5 years the Oklahoma City National Memorial. A year later, in February, we dedicated the museum. All of these things were done by us. I tell people there were professionals that came in, artists and architects and engineers and designers that said, you can't do this with these people. They're too close to the event. They're emotional. They're not professional. Bob Johnson sent them home and said, don't tell a bunch of Okies they can't do something. So everything we have done, every committee that we have ever had has been made up of that core group of family members, survivors, rescuers, and community leaders. And that's so important because that gave what we think is the Oklahoma City National Memorial the credit that the credence that it has at this point. This is a picture of the day that we did the groundbreaking for the memorial. This is Vice President Gore, of course. I'm handing him a piece of granite from the building that came out of the debris with a note explaining to him what it meant and where it came from. I mentioned in 2001 that we dedicated the museum. This is the day of the dedication that I was able to take along with police officer Ed Hill and family member Janine Gist. We took the president and Mrs. Bush through the museum prior to the dedication. The museum takes about 4 hours if you look at all the video and read all the text material. The Secret Service told us we had 20 minutes, and that's the way we handled it. The raising of the money, I think, was a big factor because we wanted to be a part of the National Park Service, but we did not want the National Park Service to dictate to us how we operated and how we funded. So we still, to this day, are an affiliate of the National Park Service, but we are an independent of all of that. When I was appointed to the Oklahoma City National Memorial Trust prior to building of the memorial, that was one of the things that we decided that we wanted to make sure that they were a part of the process. This is the picture of the memorial. This is the outdoor symbolic memorial, and I'll try to walk you through it a little bit if you can see it there. This is the footprint where the building stood. On that footprint are 168 chairs representing the 168 that were killed, including 19 smaller chairs representing the 19 children. If you knew someone or if you wanted to find someone that was killed, you go to that row on which their chair is placed, representing the 9 stories of the building, not where they were found necessarily. This gate, this water, is 5th Street that ran in front of the building. We knew when this 3 acres was going to become the memorial that we could not have traffic going through the memorial. So we asked the city to allow us to enclose it inside into the memorial, and they allowed it, and that became the reflecting pool. This is a gates of time. They're one of the gates of time. This is gate 901. This is a minute before. It was a beautiful morning. It was before the event. It was sunrise, and it was a day of beginning. This is gate 903. This is a minute after. Everything from there after that became change and a new normal, and everything that was different and became different for us and the community. In this area where the trees are, and this wall around this tree is a tribute to the rescue and recovery effort and those that helped and came and saved many of us. And this tree, we call it the survivor tree, and it was an old American elm that stood in the parking lot, which is what that area was across the street. People drove on it, didn't take care of it. Nobody said anything about it until we wrote our mission statement. And we included in that mission statement that this tree would represent hope, resilience, and survivorship. And we wanted to make sure that that tree was included. After we made that announcement, this tree got better care than any tree in the world, and still does to this day. There are seedlings that we propagate from that tree, and we've planted seedlings all over the country. Lynn and I have planted a tree in Wyckoff, New Jersey. We've planted a tree at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. There's one on Roosevelt Island. A tree from the 9/11 plaza has been planted in Oklahoma City along with the survivor tree. So those became very symbolic for us in terms of making sure that we all understood and knew each other. This is what the memorial looks like at night, looking across. You see behind it there the federal building courthouse, and behind that the old post office courthouse building. This is looking from the Journal Record building, which is this building here, which was an old historic building that absolutely withstood the blast. There were over 300 buildings in a 30-block area that were damaged to some degree or destroyed by that 4,800-pound bomb. It's just unbelievable to think that there were anybody at all survived being as close as we were to that. The federal building courthouse behind us right here, had we had the trials in Oklahoma City, this is where they would have been held. But because of the damage to that building and some of the judges' chambers and offices,
$4.8 million.
$4.8 million damage was done to that building. It was decided to change the venue to Denver. It was very difficult for us. We wanted McVeigh tried right there in our backyard, but we also realized that he probably could not get a fair trial, and justice would not be served had he not moved the trial to Denver. It turned out to be the right thing to do. There were many unique things that were done in that process. One of those was they allowed people back in Oklahoma City a closed circuit out at the FAA Center, a closed circuit viewing of the trials themselves. So many people could go and sit and watch, knowing that they couldn't go to the trials. I testified at the McVeigh trial and the Nichols trial, and then the state trial of Nichols. Keep in mind that the federal trials were only for the deaths of the 8 federal agents. The district attorney for the state of Oklahoma promised the other family members that they would get their day in court. So they had the trial for McVeigh in the state, which was down in McAllister, Mac. To say that this was something that, you know, that we never would happen. This just doesn't happen in Oklahoma City. These kind of things don't happen. It was gave us a purpose to move forward after that. And it was a once in a lifetime event. For me, it's been important as I got involved in the memorialization process to serve on nearly 13 committees, the Memorial Trust and the Memorial Board later on. Finally, after I moved down here, I had kind of used up my time on the 15 years on the board. So now I only serve on what's called the Conscience Committee. But those committees and that process have been very important for us. One of the committees that was most important to me was the mission statement. That is the guiding factor for everything that we do in the memorial to this day. We look back to that mission statement, it tells us what to do. This mission statement preamble is inscribed on the gates of time. And it simply says, we come here to remember those who were killed, those who survived, and those changed forever. May all leave here know the impact of violence, May this memorial offer comfort, strength, peace, hope, and serenity. The 12-member board that made up this committee that wrote the preamble and the mission statement, we struggled with those words, killed, peace, and hope, because at that time it was very difficult for people to realize that there was a possibility that there could be peace, hope, and serenity. We feel like that this memorial gives that to us and to the people who have come there. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to come and visit the memorial and museum. I hope you can. I did a tour last week, last Friday, with a group of about 25 people before the museum opened. That included a family of one of my co-workers, Steve Curry, that was killed in my office. There were 2 that were killed in my office and 5 of us that were injured. So it was very important for me to tell my story, but to also tell the story of the people, the building. Those people in that building, they were our family. We worked with them, we hung out with them, we played ball with them, we had ceremonies with them, did all those kinds of things. So it was just like a small family to us. And that, in an essence, is my story, the story of Oklahoma City National Memorial. I hope that has been somewhat informational for you, and I would be happy. I always tell kids when I talk to school kids that I always want to know what they want to know rather than what they think what I think I want to tell them. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Can you go ahead and give us our screen back? So I can
Yes.
see if someone raises their hand.
How can I do that?
Well, good question.
We're trying here. Hang on.
This is new for us, Mac. We're not.
Lynn, you're doing a great job.
Oh.
She is. Thank you.
you.
And she has done for the last 26 years. There we go.
There you go. Well, that's a very sobering presentation, Richard, and I'm wiping the tears away. Brian has his hand up. Brian?
Yes, Richard, thanks very much. That was a very compelling story. You're the first person I've heard who's actually been there and spoken to it, and you did a very eloquent job of doing that.
Thank you.
I have a number of questions, but I know that everybody else is going to ask their questions too. So I guess the one that is upmost in my mind is, how has this changed your view of your life, eternity, relationship with God, etc.? How has this perhaps changed your worldview?
I think it did. And a couple of things. One of the things that I tell kids all the time is I look to the 3 F's. That's family, faith, and friends, as to how I was able to heal physically and mentally. But primarily, I have to give credit to my wife and my family, because they were the ones that supported me, not only in those early days when before they found out that I was alive, even, in helping me through the healing process, physically and mentally, and allowing me to go back to work early, put the operation back together to help me get back to doing something that was positive. And then when we started the memorialization process, to attend all of those meetings and those committee get-togethers and those kind of things. And I want to share with you that in those early days, those were very difficult meetings, very difficult times, when we were making some difficult decisions about what we wanted the memorial to represent, who we wanted to be included in the memorial. One thing that I'll share with you, and I didn't show you in the video, was that on the footprint where the Murrah building stood, there are pieces of granite from the building where the survivors' names are listed. That is rarely, if ever, been done in a memorial. But when we wrote the mission statement, the family members accepted this, that they wanted the names of the survivors listed on that footprint in a manner separate, distinct, and apart from those who were killed. They accepted that for us. So that's something that's been done in this memorial that's totally unique. But I think that process of that memorialization time that I spent was cathartic and healing for me. I needed to do something, along with putting my business back together. I retired 8 years after the bombing. I went back to work for 8 years, tried to put the operation back together to some sort of normalcy for the people that we lost, and couldn't come back to work, those kind of things. But I think it, more than anything else, it was that understanding that the community, the volunteers, because everything was volunteer until we opened the memorial and museum. We actually hired people to work, but everything was done by that 350 member community committee.
If
Ellen,
I may speak, I want to tell you that something that he doesn't own up to is that I think it told us that there's something else coming. You know, there's life ahead of this. And certainly I think the Lord had planned for more for these people. And, you know, it was a looking forward that we never thought we would have to do.
Thank you.
Ellen, you had your hand up.
Thank you.
I did. I was gonna take it down, but I'll ask this question. I don't know if this is relevant to what you presented today necessarily, but maybe I can make it that way. But with the January 6th insurrection and other white supremacist actions around the country, Timothy McVeigh's name has been mentioned more and more, and
Right.
we're becoming more aware of those issues that drove him, or drove some of his, I don't know, his motivation. I'm not sure what that is. But I guess my question first was to ask if you had any thoughts on that. But maybe the question should be, has that affected the memorial? Because that's really what you have been working on, and visitation or people's interest in the memorial. So either one of those questions I would pose.
Both, Ellen. Thank you for a great question. And that's something that has been discussed at length in the memorial. They have initiated programs to talk about terrorism. One of the things that we had this past week at our 26th anniversary was our speaker was Merrick Garland, the new U.S. Attorney. And one of the things that he addressed in his presentation was that to define terrorism, he specifically talked about McVeigh and the background behind what his thinking was and the whys, because he actually was assigned here 2 days after the bombing by Janet Reno to lead the investigation. So yes, it is very relevant and we think about it constantly, but it's something that we want to, in our mission statement, we talk about teaching to the impact of violence. We want to make sure that, especially kids, understand what happens when people decide for themselves to take innocent men, women, and children's lives. So it is what it does for the memorial and museum. It gives them an opportunity to have forums and have opportunities to have people come and speak and talk to them about this. I did not know until we had a speaker the other day that told us there was not a domestic terrorism bill that they're trying to pass through at this time. So yes, it does affect, it hasn't affected necessarily the visitation or the generation of more questions, because people haven't been able to come up until the last couple of weeks because of COVID. But I see that generating now. And I think having Merrick Garland there to speak kind of helped us in terms of knowing that that was what was happening at this point.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Pat?
Yes, I want to tell you that today is my husband and I are married for 54 years.
Wow,
And
congratulations.
on the day that this happened, we were celebrating our anniversary in St. Thomas in a beautiful island vacation. And the whole island was stunned by it. The impact was, was worldwide. It's something that we'll never forget. And we all knew where we were that day. It's just a statement, no question.
No, thank you. Keep in mind that April the 19th is Patriots Day. One of the reasons that he chose that day.
So Wayne or Amy's next, and then Andy. Wayne, which one is you?
Yes, I have a question. You were injured rather severely, it looks like to me. Did that have any effect upon your hearing? Because typically in a blast situation, that's one of the first things that's affected.
That's exactly right. There were many, many people that were injured more severely than I was that did lose and have problems with their hearing. I was lucky, I did not. One of my injuries was that my ear was cut off. It was avulsed, and they actually sewed it back on, and I had glass and all this debris in there. And we went for 2 or 3 years to specialists for testing and those kind of things. And my doctor finally, after 2 years, told me that I had pretty good hearing for an old guy, that I had no adverse effects from the bombing. But there were many people that were affected by the bombing that did lose their hearing.
I think that's amazing.
It is. It is. The ATF, the Alcohol Tobacco and Firearms specialist, told me that sometimes what happens is the concussion from the blast comes in and takes over and closes up the body sometimes where you don't hear it. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't hear anything. So maybe that was my saving grace. I'm not sure.
Andy, you have a question? You have to unmute yourself though, Andy.
Thank you. First of all, what a amazing presentation. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
I have a kind of a factual question, which I'll start with, and then a personal question, if you're willing to answer it. The factual one is, I was taken when you described the fact of the people that that survived the experience, the role the fact that those people's names are there too. And I was curious. First of all, I'm a mental health guy, so I understand that these people, and I'm sure, I mean, even people on vacation in St. Thomas were affected. So I know that but the recognition that you don't just get affected if you die, you're also changes your life otherwise. I was curious as to about how many of those people would be considered in that category that work there.
The definition of a survivor for the purpose of the memorial was one of the committees that I co-chaired. It took us 8 months to write that definition because the concentric circles just kept getting bigger and bigger and coming back in. And what we were able to do, Andy, was define a delineated area for which those names would be put on the wall, those immediate survivors. We call them category A. But category B was those people that were outside that perimeter, not at work that day, on their way to work, had a doctor's appointment, those kind of things that are listed and their stories are told in the museum. So we didn't want to leave anybody out. And in the mission statement, we said those change forever. And that's how we addressed that to make sure that they were not forgotten. I vetted, along with somebody from the museum, every application to have a survivor's name put on that wall. And out of all the 600 and something names that are on there now, we think there are probably 1,000 because not everybody wants to be named. We only had 2 that were absolutely not qualified to have their name on the wall. So I think that's pretty remarkable. But we thought, and we felt like in the early days, along with the family members who we wanted there and got their blessing to do that, was to make sure that the survivors weren't forgotten, not memorialized, but forgotten, because we knew those people every day. We worked with them. We saw them sometimes more than their families did every day. So they felt like we were a part of their story.
Thank you. So about 1,000 people.
Probably, yes.
The other question is, you mentioned sort of not really experiencing the event. And I was curious as to how long was it before you woke up and what was that experience like?
I probably realistically didn't know anything till Friday. The bombing was on a Wednesday. My family kept the video, the pictures that the media was putting out there for those 2 or 3 days from me until that time, knowing that once I saw it and experienced it, what it was going to be like for me, because I knew, again, the building and the people so well. My wife said that first thing I asked about was the children. That was a special place for us. Those were our kids, along with our workers' kids. So that was something, that was one of my first thoughts, was worrying about what had happened there. The media had first came out and said, 1, that it was a federal building courthouse, which it wasn't, and 2, that there was a gas explosion. So when I saw that video for the first time, I knew better, because I knew exactly where the boiler was. I knew where the gas feeds were. I knew it couldn't have been that. They ascertained almost immediately that afternoon that it was a truck bomb, or it was a bomb. And if you get an opportunity to study the investigation, really understand, 1, how they found out who he was, where they found him, how they tracked the rider truck, the axle from the truck back to Junction City, Kansas, where they found out who rented it, all those kinds of things. That's something I didn't really get into, but that's an amazing story as to how he got caught and how he was prosecuted.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I already asked Richard a question, and as we talked a week ago and preparing for this, but I wanted to ask it to him again. Richard and I both were in the service during the Vietnam era, and I don't think we ever met anybody who was, was like a militant, against the government. Did you?
No, no, I think this was in McVeigh's story. One, it's unique to find out that he was a decorated veteran. And back to Ellen's question before, I realized that during the insurrection in